All right, so today's subject is our object-centered model of teaching. So our object-centered model of teaching shows our idea or our lesson, our object. It represents our expert, our teacher, and then our amateurs, our students. So from what you're seeing here, what are the strengths and weaknesses of this model?
It's linear. Knowledge is traveling downstream to the people who need it.
Mm-hmm. Any weaknesses?
No, if the person's not an expert in their subject, it's going to be faulty.
Yeah. So the next one I'm presenting in comparison to the object-centered model of teaching is our subject-centered model of teaching. So in this model, we have the knowers, students, and then our subject, the actual content we're learning. So when we compare the two, what are the biggest differences? In comparison, what's the biggest difference of the subject-centered model of teaching, and what are its strengths and weaknesses against the object-centered model of teaching?
Well, it's more diffused knowledge. Knowledge is more diffused. It's being gathered from different areas instead of just top-down presentation.
Mm-hmm. And then, now realistically, in a classroom, when we discuss such things, when we talk about the object-centered model of teaching, we are thinking there's elementary, middle, high school, and there's still schools using object-centered model of teaching, or at least that model of teaching. It seems that only college seems to have the subject-centered model of teaching. So what are your opinions on why this is possibly the case?
It's simpler to do the object-centered model of teaching. It's just wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to teach it, and you teach it.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes a little more effort to do the subject-centered model
of teaching. So when it all comes down to it, what would be more beneficial? Because we do want to make sure that the information is retained within our students. Like, if we want to make sure that students will carry on this knowledge past high school, middle school, elementary school, college, which model of teaching do you think would be the most beneficial in that sense or in that context?
It seems like the subject-centered model would allow the kids to come up with the answers or the understanding more organically.
Yeah.
That they would be discovering on their own through the interactions with others and bouncing off ideas off each other.
Mm-hmm.
But the object-centered model is tried and true.
It's true.
Its root of memorization